In this video, we will go into details regarding the FDR-X3000 from Sony. There are a lot of options to choose from when you actually want to film, but you might know that when you change the field of view of the camera, you're just cropping in the image. But we actually have to see how that results into reality. If you try these tests in low light, you'll have totally different results. So don't try this and never use this camera in low light because it's just awful. Note that every frame that I show you is just a portion of the frame, and it's always a screen grab, so it's never a photo. And also never take photos with this camera because it's awful too. Here we have a wide 1080 50 megabits 60 frames per second. And this is a narrow 1080 50 megabits 60 frames. So technically the only thing that's actually changing is the field of view. We're using the crop inside the camera, so it's the narrow field of view. Now we get the images to the same size, and you can start seeing something happening here. But to help you more, I'm gonna zoom in. And now you see the difference. The second image, which is actually the narrow field of view, is much clearer and much better than the same image just zoomed in. Now, this was not a total surprise, but if you actually try the same test in low light, you get the opposite result. So, stay with me. So now let's start with the narrow field of view. Always same megabits, always frame rate and same 1080, but we actually compared this with the wide 1080 50 megabits 60 frames, but 2x digital zoom, because the camera has a 3x digital zoom, and we're gonna see what's the difference now. So we zoom in, and again the narrow field of view is much clearer and much better. Look at the sign, look at the hand, than the digital zoom. So never use digital zoom with this camera. Let's go now comparing the narrow field of view with the 4K version, 60 megabits 30 frames per second. You know that 4K is actually double the size of a 1080p, so you should have something similar in details, right? Now this is the 4K version, and they seem kind of similar, but the 4K actually has more aliasing to it. So I'm guessing here we're getting somewhere. If you film at 4K, you can actually put everything in a 1080 timeline, and then you can stretch the video or just resize it, and you can have like a narrow field of view, medium field of view. You can change the field of view if you have the 4K video. So yes, it's very handy, but the frame rate is very low, 30 frames. So for action things it's not good, and even for vlogging maybe a lot of things are going to be blurred. Let's go now comparing the 1080p you're seeing here, always 50 megabits 60 frames per second, with the 4K version, which is actually bigger because it's twice as big. But now we are going to resize the 4K into a 1080 timeline and see if we actually can get the difference. This is actually the result. You can see more aliasing into the 4K version, but I would say it's kind of the same. So if you're just filming 4K, hoping to get a lot more details out of it, just resizing it to the 1080 timeline, I would just avoid that. It's not a great idea. Now another big question. We go with the wide field of view 1080 50 megabits 60 frames, and we compare this to the 1080 25 megabits 60 frames, which is the MP4 version. So the first one is the AVCS from Sony, and the second is the MP4. Then we zoom in and we have kind of the same image here. So please note that bitrate is actually affecting when you're moving, not when you're still. So it's going to make a lot of difference maybe in color correction, because you have a lot more information, and when you have a lot of things moving like leaves and like the forest, going out running, going speeding with the bike, something like that. So always go with a higher bitrate if you can. As for the last test, we're going to compare wide 1080 50 megabits 60 frames with wide 1080 60 megabits but 120 frames. Now if you look at the 100% crop, you don't see a lot of differences, but if you zoom in, there we have it. It's much worse because the sensor can't get enough light. It's so small, and the quality is just gonna be much different. So in a 100% cropped situation, I would still use 120. It's pretty usable, especially because it's a very wide lens, so you're not gonna notice a lot Just avoid 720p 240 frames because the quality loss is actually higher than this, and it's not very usable, especially indoors. Just avoid every slow-mo you can think of because it's not good. And a quick stabilization test that I made. Now, overall the camera is very good, but just in good lighting condition. The crop factor used by the field of view change is fine, but just in good lighting. Just remember that it's using a smaller part of the sensor, so it's not using the full sensor. If you crop putting the narrow field of view, you're actually giving up to some quality, and in low light this results in extreme artifacts and extreme noise. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.